Quran, Surah 73, Al-Muzzammil, the Enshrouded One. O you, wrapped in your clothes, stand all night in prayer, except a little. Pray half the night, or a little less, or a little more, and recite the Quran properly in a measured way. For we will soon send upon you a weighty revelation. Indeed, worship in the night is more impactful and suitable for recitation, for during the day you are overoccupied with worldly duties. Always remember the name of your Lord, and devote yourself to him wholeheartedly. He is the Lord of the East and the West. There is no God worthy of worship except him. So take him alone as a trustee of affairs. Be patient, O Prophet, with what they say, and depart from them courteously, and leave me, the deniers, the people of luxury, and bear with them for a little while. For we certainly have shackles, a raging fire, choking food, and a painful punishment in store for them. On the day the earth and mountains will shake violently, and mountains will be reduced to dunes of shifting sand. Indeed, we have sent you a messenger as a witness over you, just as we sent a messenger to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh disobeyed the messenger, so we seized him with a stern grip. If you pagans persist in disbelief, then how will you guard yourselves against the horrors of a day which will turn children's hair gray? It will even cause the sky to split apart. His promise of judgment must be fulfilled. Surely this is a reminder, so let whoever wills take the right way to their Lord. Surely your Lord knows that you, O Prophet, stand in prayer for nearly 2/3 of the night, and sometimes half of it, or a third, as do some of those with you. Allah alone keeps a precise measure of the day and night. He knows that you believers are unable to endure this, and has turned to you in mercy. So recite, in prayer, whatever you can from the Quran. He knows that some of you will be sick, will be traveling throughout the land seeking Allah's bounty, and some fighting in the cause of Allah. So recite whatever you can from it, and continue to perform regular prayers, pay alms tax, and lend to Allah a good loan. Whatever good you send forth for yourselves, you will find it with Allah far better and more rewarding. And seek Allah's forgiveness. Surely Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. And now the Arabic, as recited by Saad El-Ghamdi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها المزمل قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا إنا سنلقي عليك قولا ثقيلا إن ناشئة الليل هي أشد وطئا وأقوم قيلا إن لك في النهار سبحا طويلا واذكر اسم ربك وتبتل إليه تبتيلا رب المشرق والمغرب لا إله إلا هو فاتخذه وكيلا واصبر على ما يقولون واهجرهم هجرا جميلا وذرني والمكذبين أولي النعمة ومهلهم قليلا إن لدينا أنكالا وجحيما وطعاما ذا غصة وعذابا أليما يوم ترجف الأرض والجبال وكانت الجبال كثيبا مهيلا إنا أرسلنا إليكم رسولا شاهدا عليكم كما أرسلنا إلى فرعون رسولا فعصى فرعون الرسول فأخذناه أخذا وبيلا فكيف تتقون إن كفرتم يوما يجعل الولدان شيبا السماء منفطر به كان وعده مفعولا إن هذه تذكرة فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه سبيلا إن ربك يعلم أنك تقوم أدنى من ثلثي الليل ونصفه وثلثه وطائفة من الذين معك والله يقدر الليل والنهار علم أن لن تحصوه فتاب عليكم فاقرؤوا ما تيسر من القرآن علم أن سيكون منكم مرضى وآخرون يضربون في الأرض يبتغون من فضل الله وآخرون يقاتلون في سبيل الله فاقرؤوا ما تيسر منه وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة وأقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا وما تقدموا لأنفسكم من خير تجدوه عند الله هو خيرا وأعظم أجرا واستغفروا الله إن الله غفور رحيم.
This surah emphasizes the spiritual quality of nighttime, particularly for Muhammad, who, as the surah title says, is the Enshrouded One. Now, this Enshrouded One is most often considered a reference to someone who is dressed in specific garments for prayer. But as we'll go over, this could mean many other things as well, like what it meant by the Cloaked One back in Surah 74. Now, this comes from the chills he felt after his early revelations, wrapped in blankets. But it also may refer to a man just in his house in the cold desert night, wrapped up and thinking about God. As the surah says, the business of the day is gone, and now it can be just you and God, just dark and silence. And this would have been especially true in the time and place where Muhammad lived. The qualities of night can be lost, obviously, in our extremely modern world, with our artificial light and climate-controlled houses and especially endless screen-based entertainment. Night is no longer silent for us, but for Muhammad, it was. And not just because all the people are silent and asleep, but because the animals were as well, and because he lived in the desert, where you experience a very special kind of silent night. Now, for most of us, this is probably not the case. And I mean the natural world, not human activity and noisy technology. Just think, even without that, think of night where you live. And where I live, in the American Midwest, even in the countryside, and unless it's the dead of winter, nighttime is just as loud as the daytime. It's just different sounds. It's insects instead of birds. Maybe an occasional coyote. Perhaps some bullfrogs if you're near a pond. Now, most non-desert places are like this. And the result, give it a try wherever you live. Go out at midnight and just listen. What do you hear? It's probably going to be very, very different. A different kind of night than what the Quran is talking about here. The Midwestern night, like most places, it feels immersive, like you're immersed in something. It's a different kind of wonderful. Really, I actually love it. You feel a part of something, a significant part of something. Like immersed was a good word. Like it's water around you in that way, unavoidable and almost part of you. You go out at night and life is everywhere, and some of that life might be biting you. Now, the only exception, though, is in the winter, in which, the world is dead, but you don't really think about it much because it's so cold and uncomfortable. You're not going to sit there and contemplate anything outside, especially at night. But the desert is different, particularly at Mecca's latitude. Now, Mecca, as I've looked up, can get as cold as 60 degrees. Wow, 60 degrees. Now, that's 15 degrees in that newfangled Celsius thing a lot of the world seems to like. But 60 degrees, let's be honest, that's not cold. Maybe, possibly you need long sleeves and pants. But that's ideal for hanging outside all night, comfortably, and taking in the environment, which is different in the desert. Now, the desert night does not make you feel immersed. It does not make you feel like you are part of something. The desert night is silent and dead. It makes you feel alone. Alone enough, maybe, to reach out for companionship in ways that you otherwise might not do. And of course, Muhammad does this frequently, using night for long prayer sessions. And here he is being told to do it as well, meaning it's not just that something he wants to do, it's something he's being told to do by God, to take advantage of the night and use the special silence of the night to listen extra carefully, because something big is coming. Now, at this time, this is very, very early Islam. Night prayer was a big part of life in these first few years. Now, it may not have been mandatory for a while, this what they would call tahajjud, getting up in the night for prayer. And this doesn't mean night prayer as in, hey, it's been dark for a while, maybe I'll say a prayer. This is waking up in the night to pray, something which, in my mind, would be really tricky in the time before alarm clocks. Now, my guess is that this just became a ritual linked with what the ancients called the God hour, or something like that. We have a tendency to sleep in two major phases throughout the night. Something close to ideal looks something like sleep for 3 to 4 hours, wake up for 1 hour, sleep for another 3 to 4 hours. Now, this prayer we're talking about here, tahajjud, is what happens in that middle hour. Although, it seems, Muhammad and some of the other Muslims were going way long with that hour. It's sometimes all night, or half the night, as the surah states in the early verses. Now, I suppose this is one way to prove your devotion to God, and it was getting to the point that this practice was becoming a source of great pain for many. So it was probably time something needed to be done about this, some kind of clarity, some kind of guidance or restrictions. Because remember, this isn't a midnight rosary. These are Muslim prayers, which may have involved a physicality that is not part of most Christian prayer. Line 2 says, stand all night in prayer, except a little. So stand in prayer. And that's what was happening. And so eventually this was, depending on your perspective, it was either clarified or changed. Which is why we're going to skip all the way to the end for now and talk about verse number 20. Now, I understand it's the last verse, so maybe I shouldn't jump right to it, but it's important to this, and now's as good a time as any to address this. So, let's look at verse 20, the last verse. Now, this verse, I'm not going to repeat it. You could go find it again, because it's about 150 words in English, which makes it stand out, like a lot. It's not like anything else in this surah. It's super long, and it's in a style that's not like the other verses. And if you look at the Arabic, it doesn't rhyme with anything. The attempt actually wasn't even made. Only lines 1 and 20 do not rhyme, and all the others end in an A sound. And 20 does not rhyme with 1, in case you're wondering, so it doesn't rhyme with anything. It's an outlier in all possible ways. To use an English cliche, it sticks out like a sore thumb. Or in the case of the Muslims who may have first heard this surah, they may have had a sore foot. And it reads like a tacked-on sermon thrown in after the fact. And the reason for that is, most Muslim scholars will tell you, well, it's because actually, it is a tacked-on sermon thrown in after the fact. This is a Meccan sermon with a one-verse Medinan conclusion. So verse 20 oddly kind of cancels out verses 1 to 8, emphasizing moderation in prayer at night. Now, it gives reasons some may not be able to do it, and basically takes something that was once thought to be mandatory, and it makes it voluntary. And again, in the Muslim world, this is not a scandalous thing. It is by far the majority opinion of this particular surah. Now, why do most scholars think that this last line is Medinan? What's the evidence? Well, this verse is full of Medinan themes, most notably fighting in the cause of Allah. And I think the most convincing of these other arguments is the use of the word zakat in that last line. Now, zakat is a proper noun, sort of. It's the obligatory poor tax. And the rest of this surah seems a bit early for that. Sequentially, should I say chronologically, this surah as a whole, if you take out 20, is basically surah number 4. So very, very early. Now, a specific word for an obligatory tax seems incredibly unlikely here. And it actually uses the proper name, al-zakat. So that's pretty convincing evidence. And usually that would be the end of the debate. But this sort of represents an initial command that kind of got scaled down when they got to Medina. Except that, as much of an outlier as he may be, there is at least one person who says something differently. One commentator, among the commentators that I really, really respect, does have a different opinion on this. So before we kind of close the book on that and say, all right, this is how it is, I do think this is worth mentioning. And this debate is important because the meaning of this surah can be different depending on whether there is the tacked on, scaled back command on night prayer, or whether this whole thing was given all at once, as in giving the ideal and then specifying some practical realities. Now, regarding this surah, Muhammad Asad makes the claim that connecting this surah to Medina is, in his words, something that lacks all substance. Again, minority opinion, but this is somebody I respect. So again, I just think it's worth talking about, at least briefly. Now, the mention of struggle in the way of God that's in this, or in line 20, he says, this is actually the Quran previewing the future, talking about the future, rather than the present. And that is why that last line, line 20, that's why it's in there. It's a preview of what is to come, rather than a present command given in Medina. And this is an interesting point, because this surah does not use the term jihad to talk about struggle or fight. Jihad being a mostly Medinan-associated term. This actually uses a form of the verb qatala, which means to kill or slay or engage in fighting, meaning physical violence. Now, that is not the name brand jihad that would become so famous. Now, the word jihad, as far as I know, it first appears in the Quran in Surah al-Baqarah, which is Surah 2, which was revealed in Medina. The point being, in case I'm not being clear here, that the use of this qatala word instead of the word jihad points to it actually being a Meccan surah, and an early Meccan surah, right? Because the theory is, if this had been written in Medina, they wouldn't have used that term. They would have used the term jihad. But again, they didn't. It says qatala. And that's very interesting. But I think many would say the major flaw in that argument is that this surah does use the word zakat. It doesn't say jihad, but it does talk about zakat, which is something Muhammad Asad never actually addresses in his commentary. Now, this zakat, this does seem oddly specific. It doesn't say alms or give the poor. It says al-zakat, the specific name of the obligatory poor tax, which really gives great strength to the Medina argument. Now, normally, I would be kind of sympathetic to Assad's argument here. Now, I think a large part of what he's railing against here is he probably just has a general exasperation of literary criticism in religious texts, in this case, the Quran. And to an extent, he's right about that. And it is something you should be skeptical of. People who do this are often too cute by half and present conjecture and weak probability as if they are mathematical proofs. They are not. But in this case, Assad is probably wrong. At least he's on the wrong side of a 10, maybe 100 to 1 probability. But that doesn't mean he's wrong. It just means he probably is. And again, this isn't something I would have probably mentioned other than his status as a major English commentator. So, verse 20. Just remember that everything said earlier in this surah will be tempered in the conclusion. All right. So, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go from the end back to the beginning, because I want to talk about the title phrase here. Al-Muzzammil. Let's use the translation, the enwrapped one. As I said before, this most likely refers to someone, actually Muhammad specifically, getting up in the night, wrapping himself in clothing, and going to pray. And like I said, it might also refer to him being wrapped up after his revelations. I mean, maybe. But we're talking about prayer here and not revelations. And there are a few more reads on this term. And by reads on the term, I mean metaphorical readings of enwrapped one, not different readings on the Arabic term. Al-Muzzammil is a very specific term and one without much flexibility. It's the noun form of wrapping something up, and there's little else that comes from this root. It's the verb to wrap or to cover, and the verb form of someone or something that is wrapped and covered. So, if you're going to dig deeper, you have to run with the metaphor rather than finding something more in the actual language. And people do. As we said, wrapped up can mean the obvious, but it can also represent someone who is occupied with things other than God, who are wrapped up, so to say, in other things that are keeping them from prayer. Wrapped up in oneself, wrapped up in sex, wrapped up in business. So maybe this is to help those people ask themselves, what should I really be wrapped up in? Perhaps I should be wrapped up for prayer. For these people, night could be a perfect time to forget all those other things. Or, if you want to go back to Muhammad himself, it could also be emphasizing Muhammad being wrapped up in prayer. And, with those garments that he's carrying, that he's wrapped up in, he's carrying the heavy responsibility of transmitting God's message. And there's also the possibility that Muhammad is being told that Muhammad, might just be wrapped up in prayer a little too much. Or, at minimum, some of his followers are. And we have that final line that gives an easier prescription to the people. It's almost saluting Muslims for their piety and their dedication, but also saying, listen, you're humans, okay? You are finite beings, and it's okay to take your foot off the gas pedal every once in a while. Actually, I want you to do it a lot. All right, one more thing here. Now, this is just something I find interesting about lines 12 and 13. Now, let me start by actually reading those lines so you remember. It says, "For we certainly have shackles, a raging fire, choking food, and a painful punishment in store for them." Now, when I read this, admittedly, I don't tend to read it slowly or carefully. Most people don't. Because, let's be honest, you see something like this, and your brain says, all right, we have bad thing, horrible consequences. And you don't tend to read this with your whole focused mind. Your brain tends to skip ahead and say, okay, I got the metaphor, what's next? Now, I do that often, and many do that. But the ancient scholar Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, he saw more. And he actually saw a distinct pattern here that I want to share with you. He says there are 4 things there. Number 1, the shackles. Number 2, a raging fire. Number 3, food that chokes. And number 4, a painful punishment. One thing I think that Raziel is pointing out here is that 4th thing, the 4th one, a painful punishment. That's not just a summary of the other 3 more specific things. Now, what I mean is, it's not saying there will be shackles and a raging fire and of food that chokes. And those things will be a painful punishment. Now, what Brazil is saying is this actually says there will be shackles, then a raging fire, then a food that chokes, then a painful punishment. So what he's saying is this is actually a sequence of events. And it's referring to people's attachment to something that we Christians would call sin, and how that leads to slavery to sin and an inability to address spiritual matters. Now, that creates a raging spiritual fire, so to speak, as the sin compounds on itself until it becomes an inferno. Then a person is unable to actually eat, to feed on this substance-free food, the temporary things of life, and then chokes on this non-spiritual food. And with this, in the end, he is ultimately separated from God, which is a painful punishment. Now, is that the true intent? I mean, who knows, really? I just found it interesting. And like I've said before, that's the mark of a successful religious text. Is it mysterious enough that people will do things like that to it? Read multiple things into it, and care enough to see things at different levels and in different ways, and read it late at night, whether wrapped in something or not, and reflect deeply on its significance. Now, people do that with the Quran, which makes it, whether you believe it is true or whether it is not true, that makes it a successful religious text, because people meditate on this surah, often at night, and have done so for a very, very long time. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time. Inshallah.